Good evening, everybody. This is so great to see all of you here. My name is Megan Patterson. I'm the Chief HR Officer at Kanata. I'm not sure where to look because I've got my back to somebody at all times, so I apologize for that. This is an absolute honor to be here with all of our friends and our colleagues from the Ottawa tech community. I just want to say a big thank you for coming out. I think you'll all agree this is a huge honor. When I got the call from Jenna on Wednesday night, I was on vacation. I didn't know what she was talking about, and here we are on Monday pulling this event together. So huge thank you to everybody who helped put this together and helped us do this. Few housekeeping items before we get started. Please make sure that your phones are on silent. This format's going to be Ask Me Anything. And it literally is Ask Me Anything, so you can ask him anything you want. When you want to ask a question, just put up your hand, and we've got some mic runners in the room. You'll be called upon by the Prime Minister. The mic runner will come to you. Please introduce yourself, say your name, and then ask your question. I think that's it for housekeeping. It's important that people stay sitting. We've got lots of cameras in the room, so stay sitting, stay out of the line of sight. Unless you're asking a question, then obviously stand. And I think that's about it. So we're about to get started, and it is my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome and introduce our Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau.
Thank you so much, Megan. Thank you, Megan, for your welcome. It is great to be here at Kanata. Thank you for choosing to be here tonight to participate in a very democratic exercise, an opportunity for me to hear directly from you about the things that you're preoccupied with, and maybe for you to hear some answers from me on where I think we're going and what the kinds of things that as a country, as a government, as communities, as a tech sector, we can and should be working on. But while I talk about politics, first thing I want to do is recognize my friend Jenna Sudds, who is here somewhere. Jenna, there you are. There you are. Your local MP, who has done a really great job for many, many years. Believing in the tech sector here, boosting Kanata, getting me to come out here for an awful lot of events, which is really exciting because there's a lot going on here. But it's a real privilege to be back here. I guess fundamentally, what I'm doing here tonight is something that really should be at the core of the kinds of democratic conversations we need to have as a country. So much of politics these days is about sound bites. So much of it is about attacks or popularity contests. We don't tend to have enough politics in full sentences. And that idea of politics as a conversation between people, I think, is something that we need to start getting back to as a country, as democracies. One of the big challenges we have these days is politics has become almost more about identity than about policies. And you see a hardening of positions, a little more polarization. And it's a bit of an irony because we have more abilities to communicate, to share our perspectives than ever before online in so many different ways of connecting and expressing ourselves. It seems that fewer and fewer people are actually listening to each other, or listening to a broad range of voices. And I think a big part of democracy has to be how we actually listen to each other, because we're all going to have slightly different perspectives on how to approach a challenge, how to best articulate our values into policies and programs and solutions that are going to bring us forward as a country. I mean, the nice thing is, in countries like Canada, regardless of how diverse we are, we can all pretty much agree on the kind of direction we need to go in. I mean, nobody's really going to stand there and say, no, I don't want a safer and prosperous future for my kids. I don't want to live in strong, thriving communities where there's a lot of different opportunities to challenge yourselves, to learn from each other, and to build a better future. I don't want to have a meaningful contribution to my community. I don't want to live in a country where the world looks to us as a resource or an example or being a cautionary tale sometimes, or to be there to solve things or contribute. We all want the same kinds of things for ourselves, our communities, our families. Where there are really important conversations to be had is which things do we prioritize? What is the balance that we put towards social programs or innovation? You know, how much do we invest in our military? How much do we invest in humanitarian aid? How do we shape our communities, our society to properly ensure people's freedom of choices, freedom of expression, freedom to pick their careers, while at the same time we're making sure that we're getting all the other balances right. And those are complex conversations. There's all sorts of competing values and interests we have. And one of the most important things in any society is for people to actually hear from people who maybe have a slightly different perspective. One of the great things about Canada is we do diversity better than just about any other place in the world. And those of you in the tech sector, but in any sort of innovative or creative sector, know full well that diversity of perspectives, of backgrounds, of stories, of experiences actually contributes in really meaningful ways to sparking new ideas, new solutions, to finding new ways of solving old problems. As we know from nature, resiliency comes from diversity. When you have a super diverse ecosystem, it's going to handle shocks or disruptions a lot better than a monoculture or a place that has been stripped down to just a couple of species. The same thing with groups of people. If you pull together a group of people who all went to the same school and grew up with the same background and practice the same religion and speak the same language at home, you're not going to get the kind of range of potential solutions that you could if you're gathering a whole bunch of people together to solve the same problem. But one of the challenges that comes with diversity is it's really easy and it's tempting for all of us to lean in and gather around people who we agree with all the time. And whether that's in creative industries or tech industries or in politics, that can be a real challenge because we're trying to solve challenges for everyone. So having real conversations, respectful about where we're going and what we're doing has never been more important, particularly now when the world is in such a state of change. There's so many challenges we're facing right now everywhere around the world. It seems like over the past few years, whether it's the climate crisis getting more and more serious, whether it was the pandemic, whether it's the war in Ukraine, whether it's the most recent challenges in the financial markets in the United States that I know is causing a real concern in a number of tech sectors. There's a lot going on. And we're seeing the world in a bit of a pivot. It's sort of shifting in some of our approaches. What are the kinds of jobs that are going to be successful over the coming decades? What's the kind of future for our communities, for our country, for our industries, for our economy? There's a lot of uncertainty, and that's leading to a lot of anxiety. And one of the things that I think we need to do better in politics is talk about what we're facing and lean in on sharing real solutions, and not even if we don't have all the answers, at least the framework with which we're going to search for those answers. Because Canada has been through tough times before, much tougher times than these ones. And the way we've been able to get through them consistently has always been to pull together, to roll up our sleeves, to lean on our neighbors, and work hard, really hard, to get through. That's exactly the kinds of things that we're going to be able to do now, but we'll do it best if we're actually listening to each other and if we're engaging in constructive, positive ways. Not because we all agree and we're going to sit around singing Kumbaya, but because a range of different answers are going to challenge our ways of thinking, bring us to new perspectives, and allow us to move forward in stronger and resilient, more resilient ways. That's why I'm always so excited to be here with the tech sector. So excited to hear the range of questions we have. I assume there'll be some questions about industries that I don't know nearly as well as you, but tonight I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you on a range of questions. Et évidemment, s'il y a quelqu'un qui a des questions dans l'autre langue officielle, je serais très content de pouvoir vous répondre en français aussi. On va faire ça dans les deux langues ce soir, mais je suis très content de prendre vos questions. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start here, I guess, and I'll just work my way around the room with questions. So let's start with someone from this section here. Here we go, right up in the front. There you go. And her phone's all ready. So what's your name?
So my name is Jamie Penton, and I am the president and CEO of the Kanata North Business Association. It is an absolute honor to welcome you to what we know here in this room as the heart of Canada's largest technology park. And you know that in working so closely with MP Suds for now a number of years, our incredible advocate. So with that said, tonight we are surrounded by engineers, students, aspiring entrepreneurs, long-standing executives here from all walks of life, and they represent the over 33,000 that are employed here in Ottawa. As Canada's original supercluster, building on 50+ years of telecoms R&D and innovation, I wonder if tonight you can kick us off this evening by sharing what you're most excited about in the future of Canada's innovation agenda, and more specifically, talk to us about how our community can contribute to Canada's aspirations for technology growth on a global scale. As you know, our companies are global in nature, doing business all around the world, and creating world-class products for world-class systems.
Well, thank you, Jamie. First of all, thank you to the Kanata North Business Association for helping host this evening tonight. I really appreciate the work you did to gather this room filled with people. I guess there's a couple of things. First of all, on Kanata, as I pointed out, I keep coming out here. It was a few years ago for a BlackBerry and Ford announcement on autonomous vehicles. Most recently, it was an announcement around Nokia enlarging their campus here. And one of the things I was reflecting around that Nokia investment, and it's always a balance, right? We want to make sure we're investing in great Canadian companies that are growing and scaling up, but we also want to draw in global investors to contribute to a stronger ecosystem where we can get more Canadian startups to come around them. And it's that getting that balance right. But on the Nokia investment, as I was talking to the company representative that was here with us, it was about a $300 million investment, and the federal government had to put in $40 million. And they were going to they are in the process of building one of their 5 global R&D hubs here in Canada, right here in Kanata, actually. And I was thinking to myself, it wasn't because we were the only country willing to cough up $40 million to get one of the 5 R&D hubs for a global communications giant like Nokia. So, I mean, I was standing beside Doug Ford, taking credit for bringing this great announcement in, but we knew it had nothing to do, or very little to do with us. It had everything to do with the talent pool that's here. You mentioned the engineers, the students, the researchers, the folks here in Canada, the folks here in Kanata, who are, well, in Canada, we have the highest educated population in the OECD. We have a consistent level of engineering and science quality that is competitive with the world around. We have, benefits around all sorts of costs of living, whether it's quality of lifestyle, whether it's healthcare and now dental care, whether it's immigration that allows people to actually see responding to the labor shortages that are par for the course around competitive economies around the world, seeing Canada and Canadians still being so positive towards immigration. We have a lot of advantages, but our fundamental key advantage has always been Canadians themselves. That is what I get to sell around the world as we're drawing in companies like Volkswagen. I was just doing a pitch to Michelin to get them to invest more in Nova Scotia. These global companies come here because Canadians are steady, are solid, are hardworking, and are ambitious and innovative at the same time. There is such an advantage we have as contributors to the knowledge economy, that we get to draw in amazing, innovative companies and create great ecosystems. We have to get better at commercializing and patenting and scaling up, and I think you all know that, and it's a challenge that as a government we've really been leaning in on. We're talking about building a Canadian Innovation Corporation that's really going to be focused on creating more opportunities for those scale-ups, because we have to do that. But we have tremendous advantages that the world is looking at. But let's not forget, we're also Canada. We have great forests and natural resources and mineral resources and energy resources that can come add to those advantages. The fact that we have both the raw materials to build the batteries of the future, to be an alternative source of lithium to the world than the one supplier that we're all relying on now, to be a place where critical minerals are actually not just mined, but then transformed into innovative solutions right here, because we have the engineers and creators for it. Canada is incredibly well positioned to do something that you here at Kinaxis know all about, which is provide steady, reliable supply chains to the world at a time where supply chain resiliency is more important than it ever has been before because of the shock of the pandemic. So there are an awful lot of things that is putting Canada in an amazingly positive position for the years to come. Some of the best thinkers and researchers, some of the most innovative and hardworking natural resource companies and workers across the country, high quality manufacturing and innovation that works at market access to 2/3 of the global economy, the only G7 economy with a free trade deal with every other G7 economy. Like, we have all sorts of really great advantages, and it's not just a flash in the pan, it's the steady leadership of people in places like here in Kanata over decades and years that have built up this expertise, this capacity to do it. And I am just so excited about what opportunities are going to come in the years to come, and I know that you'll be right there as a partner with us as we do it. Thank you, Jamie. Another question from over here. There you go. You in the back.
Good evening. My name is Erica Butler. I work here with Kinaxis as a program manager. It's known that technology is amongst the lowest for a percentage of women within STEM. It's about 25% globally. I'm wondering what the government of Canada is looking to do to increase that number and encourage more women to join the tech industry.
It's a great question, because when we talk about diversity bringing different solutions, there's a fundamental diversity. If half of your population isn't fully engaged and part of creating those technological solutions for the future, you're missing out on an easy opportunity to challenge yourselves properly as a company even more. I mean, we've all seen the stats on boards, for example. Companies that have more women on their boards have made it through economic shocks a lot better than companies that haven't. But that goes the same for companies with a higher proportion of women engineers and folks in the tech industry. These are things that people are starting to see, that gender balance and inclusive policies are not just about sort of ticking a box or being nice or looking like you're a modern, progressive company. It's actually about better solutions and better quality of output, and that's a big piece of it. But one of the things, I mean, there are specific policies that we need to make sure we're continuing to put in place. A number of them around encouraging women and girls to get into STEM programs in school. There's a lot of really important initiatives going on across the country around that. There are other things pretty fundamental to that. We still know, despite it being 2023, that women carry a disproportionate amount of responsibilities around the home, around child rearing specifically. And that's why it became such a priority for us to finally move forward 50+ years after the Royal Report on the Status of Women came in this country, which had as its #1 recommendation affordable high-quality childcare, we finally moved forward on childcare. And childcare fees have come down in half across Ontario over the past year. That was a commitment we made working with all the provinces. Right across the country, they're on their way down to $10 a day. There are some places, Newfoundland and Labrador and Manitoba, among others, that are already down at $10 a day. Ontario's coming at its own pace, but it'll get there. That's all I'm going to say about that. But you know, it is something that is really important. I think the interesting thing is, as a government, as a party, we've been talking about childcare for many, many years. It's one of the few good things to come out of the pandemic, because a whole bunch of people who didn't really think much about childcare or whether it would be necessary suddenly realized what happens when the kids stay home and you can't send them to school. And everyone understood that it's not just a social program, it's also very much an economic program. Yes, it gives the kids the best start in school once they start. It takes off a huge amount of pressure on the family and allows women specifically to not have to choose between career and family. But it also is a source of growth for businesses that can then know that they're going to be able to hire more people, that women are going to get back into the workforce. And it's a huge positive right there. So that's a piece of it. More than that, it's just continuing to grind away at it, continuing to convince little girls in school that there is a place for them. And the more role models they see and the more we talk about it, the more we're going to be able to start closing those gaps. Thank you for your question, Erica. Question from over here? Okay, right in the very back. There you are.
Thank you. Good evening, Prime Minister. My name is Dave Newby. I work for a company called InTouch Insight, which is one of the tech companies here in the park. Before I left home, I asked my 4 kids if they were meeting the Prime Minister tonight, what questions they would like to ask. And my 8-year-olds would like to know what your favorite Pokemon is. But that's not my question for you. One of my older ones was obviously, she's 17 years old, and she was concerned about climate change, as a lot of the teenagers are talking all about this a lot at the moment. Today there was a report that was announced by the United Nations, the most recent report, apparently the most scientifically detailed analysis that has come out, and is now saying that we all need to be able to meet our net zero emissions much earlier than had previously been anticipated. How does this affect the plan that Canada has, and how do you make this something that we can all get behind and doesn't become parochial politics?
It's a huge question. It goes to one of the big challenges of politics, where politics is almost by definition short-term, right? What you're going to do for someone over the next 4 years until you have to show up for an election will be a huge part of, you know, whether or not they're going to vote for you again to continue. If you delivered well during the past few years, they'll let you deliver further. And climate change, I mean, it's the slow boiling of a frog, right? It happens so gradually that you never quite realize it's an emergency until we start seeing the level of extreme weather events that we're being hit with right now, whether it's flooding out west, or more wildfires in the prairies, or droughts in the prairies, or dealing with Hurricane Fiona and more frequent extreme hurricanes as we're adjusting to. But even then, convincing people that we need to change our behaviors in very significant ways is always going to be a challenge. That's why Canada, despite the pledges around Kyoto and years of talking about how important it is to protect the environment, didn't really get a whole bunch done over the past few decades. Not that any country really did, but we could have done more. I think we all know that. It would have been easier had we done more a few years ago or a few decades ago than it is to do now to change the curve. But we should take that knowledge and say, okay, well, that means doing things now will be a lot easier than if we put things off to 10 years from now or 20 years from now. And that's where actually understanding the role of Canada is really important, because as some of my colleagues like to point out, Canada is actually directly responsible for a very tiny fraction of global emissions. And if we were to completely stop all economic activity tomorrow, the world wouldn't even notice in terms of what we'd reduce in terms of emissions. And for a number of people, that's a reason to throw up your hands and say, well, why should we bother doing anything? But I think that misses both a piece of responsibility and a huge piece of opportunity. The responsibility, first of all, is we all have to be figuring out how to reduce our carbon emissions in ways that are successful. And if a country that hasn't, a country like Canada that has the resources, the opportunities, the energy, the innovative population, the people who are connected to nature and understand how important wilderness is around us as part of our quality of life, if we can't motivate ourselves to do it, well, who will? We're also an extremely wealthy country, one of the G7 countries, one of the top 10 economies in the world. I think we might be 11th right now. But we have a responsibility to try and lead the way. We're also one of the countries that is an oil producing company, an energy producing country in the world. And that makes it more difficult for us to move forward on climate change, which is the excuse my predecessor used to use all the time as to why we couldn't do much on climate change. But when I first got elected in the 2015 election as Prime Minister, we'd seen clearly from Canadians, they were saying, okay, you know what, enough of that. We need to actually start leading on climate change. And that's why I made the commitment that we were going to bring in a price on pollution. And yeah, it's interesting because the most conservative economists, small c conservative economists out there have always pointed out that putting a price on something allows the market to actually do its work in a minimally distorting way, and it's actually the best way of reducing something you don't want by putting a price on it. Right now, polluting was free, and we said, okay, if you want to pollute, you're going to have to pay a little bit of premium on that. And what that means is you are incentivized to figure out ways to pollute less. It's basic price signals. The problem with that, of course, is that Canadians hear that and say, wait, you're going to put a tax on everything? That doesn't work for me because I still need to drive to work. I still need to heat my home in the winter. And that's why what we did with that price on pollution almost 8 years ago was different than what just about any other country in the world has done around their price on pollution. And we said, instead of taking the revenues from that price on pollution and putting it into innovations in green tech, which a number of countries have done successfully, or putting it into a fund to pay for future social benefits or whatever, we actually returned it straight to Canadians. So you get the price signal for individuals, for companies, but it actually doesn't end up costing any more to Canadians. The average families here in Canada get more money back every year than the carbon tax adds to what they pay. People might say, remember conversations early on, well, what's the use of it then if you're just going to put it? It's because if you choose to buy a more fuel-efficient vehicle, you won't be paying as much in terms of the price on pollution, and we'll still be returning you every bit as much as you were before you bought that. So you do a little bit better. But for companies, I was talking to DeFasco, one of our big steel companies in Hamilton, that's been there for generations. They got third-generation steel workers, a couple of fourth-generation steel workers there that I met a few months ago when I was there. And I asked them how much the price on pollution would end up costing them by 2030. They say about $150, $200 million a year with our current technologies, which is why they made the decision to switch to away from coal-burning steel processes to electric arc steel processes. And when we first agreed it with them, they said we're going to do it by 2028, and they recently came back and said, no, we're doing it by 2026. I said, great, you realized how important the environment is and how urgent it is to change. They're like, yeah, no, I know that wasn't the reason you did it. I go, why did you really do it? They said, because the global market for steel is pretty flat right now, But the global market for green steel, for cleaner steel, shooting up like nobody's ever seen. People want cleaner products. Their clients, their customers are asking for the provenance. So, and this isn't just a Canadian company, this is the steel giant ArcelorMittal that decided that they were going to make that investment here in Canada. Because our price on pollution gave that context, and because we've been showing for the past 8 years that we're actually willing to do really big things, even though we remain one of the fossil fuel producing countries in the world. But we're busy aggressively decarbonizing, we're busy investing in renewables, and because of that, companies like Volkswagen that decided to build its very first battery plant outside of Europe in Canada, and not elsewhere in North America or elsewhere around the world. And other companies are coming to Canada because they are seeing that we are actually ahead of the curve. And what we've always said is climate change was going to be a challenge and an opportunity. We're seeing the opportunity come in right now because this is the way the world is going. And people want to know where there is the stability and the predictability and the understanding that this is an opportunity for us to figure out these solutions. So even though our contributions to global emissions are minimal, if we figure out how to drive down our emissions and create economic success and create good jobs as we're beginning to, as we're seeing, countries around the world will increasingly take notice and figure out either how to do like us or how to buy the solutions that we're busy creating and solving. And that's how Canada can and must contribute to the fight against climate change, and to do it ever quicker and with ever more urgency. So please thank your daughter for the question, Dave. Question from over here. Here we go. Yes, you in the blue shirt.
Mr. Prime Minister, thank you so much for this opportunity. My name is Prab Regmi, and I'm working at Kinaxis as a manager. By the way, so full disclosure, I was not sure if I should ask this question to you, so I checked with ChatGPT, and it agreed. So therefore...
Well, at least ChatGPT didn't come up with it, so there's that.
May have. Anyway. So my question is, what is the government doing to support the development and retention of the tech talent in Canada, particularly in light of increasing competition from other countries? You know, quite often we hear about brain drain specifically to the States around the Silicon Valley.
Listen, that's a great question, Prab. You know, it was actually a question I challenged some folks in the tech industry when I went down to a conference down in the United States after I first got elected to talk about you know, where we were going to try and go and all this sort of innovative investments in Canada and how we were excited. I said to a number of big tech companies, so what is it that would help you draw up and expand your footprint in Canada? And they said talent. If we can bring in top talent from around the world in a matter of weeks, we will increase our footprint and grow our facilities in Canada. I said, great, and we created the Global Skills Strategy. Over the past few years, about 63,000 top talents, engineers, tech workers, innovators, scientists, have been able to come to Canada in 2 weeks. A 2-week process to bring in. It's not the solution for everything, but it demonstrates the ability that we have to bring in people, because we know if someone wants to open a shop, they're going to want to bring in some of their top managers to make sure the culture and the consistency is there. But then they know that Canadian schools are churning out enough of the top engineers and top talent that they're going to be able to hire, and our regular immigration streams means they're going to be able to hire people to fill those floors and those workshops with the kind of talents they need. And that has been a really big piece of it. That's not the only part of it. Obviously, Canada is looking at being competitive with, you know, when you think of the new Inflation Reduction Act that they put forward in the United States. It's drawing in a lot of high-tech, clean tech investment. they've got really, really deep pockets and a reserve currency, so they can go way further into debt than we can. So it's hard to compete one-to-one with that, but we're making sure we're remaining competitive, and some of the investments that we've seen come into Canada are great. And yes, we do have to put some money on the table, but we also have a lot of inherent advantages that the rest of the world isn't necessarily able to compete with. We have a level of political stability, a level of openness to immigration, a level of quality of life, healthcare, quality public education, the kinds of things that people know. We have already an incredibly diverse country and a real openness to people coming in and continuing to enrich it. These are advantages. We have a lot of geography and room to grow and expand. We have connections already with every corner of the world in terms of trade. We have a very, very solid reputation as one of the top countries in terms of quality of life. There's a lot of things we can do to draw people in. We need to keep working on it. We need to keep making sure that's going. I mean, through the pandemic, we had to close our borders like everyone did, and we're busy trying to catch up on the backlog on immigration. But this year we put forward some of the largest numbers we've ever had. And when you look at the population growth projections for most of the developed countries around the world, Canada stands as the one country that is projecting to continue to grow its population in really exciting ways. And that's something that, when companies come and they say, okay, we're going to make an investment here for the next 20, 30 years, it used to be, well, what kind of tax credits can you give me, whatever. Now they're looking at, okay, how am I going to be able to make sure that I can grow as I'm successful? How are we going to be able to bring in the kind of workforce that we need? And that's a question that we have great answers for, and we're going to continue making sure we do. So thank you for your question. Another question. Yes.
Thank you very much. My name is Behrouz, Distinguished Machine Learning Architect at Kinaxis. So as you know, there's been a lot of advancement recently in the area of artificial intelligence and machine learning. And so my question is, and with great universities and research institutes in Montreal and Toronto, Waterloo, Canada is one of the countries to be at the forefront of this technology, and I'm very proud to be in Canada. And so what measures is government taking place to remain competitive in this space? And how can we make sure that the average Canadian is equipped with the right skill set to be competitive in this global market? And also, how can we make sure that the benefits of these technologies are distributed equitably across Canada, not to exacerbate certain inequalities or create new types of inequalities?
Oh, listen, that's a great question, Behrouz. Canada was extremely, I wouldn't say we were lucky. I think we had a certain amount of foresight that, a decade and a half ago, a couple of decades ago, when the world sort of shrugged its shoulders and turned away a little bit from AI and felt that it just wasn't the path it was going to be. There were a few people like Geoffrey Hinton at the University of Toronto and Yoshua Bengio in Montreal and Rich Sutton in Edmonton who stuck with it. And they made it through the AI winter that was going on around the world. And we ended up with machine learning. We ended up with this extraordinary level of accomplishment and now of clusters around AI that have put Canada among the leaders in the world. Now, there's two things you need for successful AI development and deployment. One is brilliant creative minds building it, solving challenges and solution. The others are really big, reliable data sets. There are countries in the world, I think of China, for example, that don't really preoccupy themselves too much with privacy issues, that are able to give huge data sets to their AI researchers, but they don't have the quality of innovators and researchers that we've been able to generate here, partially because of diversity, partially because of just years and decades of investment in academic science that is world-class here in Canada. But the challenge with Canada, as I mentioned before, is always commercialization. How do we actually get to translate that into jobs and economic growth? I'm not so worried about how we distribute the wealth that we'll create in Canada. We tend to do a pretty good job of that. I mean, yes, we have to be mindful about it, but it wouldn't do us terribly to see a few more really successful, platforms developed and a few more successful, innovators who become world famous for like buying spaceships and things like that. I mean, there could be a few more Canadians doing that, and we'll all benefit. But one of the advantages that we have in Canada around AI is the world has been looking to us and a few others to lead on the global partnership for AI. And what that is talking about the ethics of AI. Talking about, yes, how do you make sure you're building algorithms that will teach themselves and move forward to think ethically and to not do too much evil, and how you frame it in the right way. But it's also about making sure that the people designing those algorithms are themselves representative of the widest possible swath of population and experiences. If you have a handful of non-diverse people designing a machine, no matter what they want to do, there are going to be biases and ways of thinking that slip into it. And the more you can ensure a bringing in of multiple perspectives and different experiences, the better, more likely you're going to be able to create something that is more suited to the kinds of challenges around the world. Canada is a place that is grounded in individual rights and freedoms, that recognizes how important diversity and the value of every individual is. Bringing that to bear as we help contribute to AI discussions around the world is a really, really important part. And it's one of the reasons why every time I go to visit an AI institute across this country, I see students from every corner of the world. And of course I ask them, so you're planning on staying in Canada? And some of them, yes, we love it here, we want to stay, please give me citizenship. I'm like, okay, I'll work on it. But the others are like, no, I'm looking forward to going home and bringing what I learned here. But I know that what they are learning here, the way they are working and the way they are learning and the society that they get to be part of is likely to help contribute to the kind of thinkings that we're trying to have around AI as a tool for good, and not just good for a few, but good for everyone. And that's part of the challenge. Thank you, Bruce. Another question. You in the back.
Thank you very much. I'm Kathy Curry. I'm the city councillor for Kanata North. I took over for Jenna. You took her, and they got me.
Big shoes.
Big shoes. So thank you for this opportunity. My question is really on housing and transportation, maybe as any city councillor would ask. But we have a special economic district here in Kanata North. That's what our official plan designated, 540 tech companies. Nokia's development will include 1,900 units where people can live. Across the road will be 2,100 is being applied for. In the year 2022 in Kanata North, we approved 5,100 places for people to live. The challenge we have is March Road, where we need a bus rapid transit up the center, and we need LRT Stage 3 out to Kanata. And we also have a Kanata Lakes golf course that the developers want to develop when we have a 40% green space agreement to not have development there. So I just wondered if you could make a number of comments. I do want to say thank you very much for your comments about the Housing Accelerator Fund, the $4 billion that we will be applying for in June. And thank you very much for all of your comments on how the federal government, the provincial government, the municipalities need to work together on providing more affordable housing. But anyway, anything you have to say on that, I'd be happy to hear.
Well, first of all, on the housing accelerator, and this is one of the things that often comes up on when we talk about immigration. People are like, well, where are people going to live? We're already squeezed on housing. You bring in more people. First of all, our immigration targets of 425,000 permanent residents this year. The process of applying for permanent residency for the vast majority of people involves being in Canada for a few years already. So those aren't necessarily net new homes. There are already people, many of them in Canada, when we talk about our immigration targets. Of course, we bring in a lot of refugees and a lot of people come in on work visas every year. So we do need to build more housing stock, which is one of the reasons we decided that $4 billion to municipalities was really going to unlock a lot of things. And let me explain. Someone said, okay, you want to build more houses? Well, federal government should just put money into buying 2x4s and buckets of screws, right? I mean, that's how we're going to need to, that's not how you build houses in this country. I mean, yes, that's how you build it, but not us. You don't want the federal government building your house that way. What you want is to empower and enable municipalities to figure out how to unlock even more housing constructions in their communities in ways that make sense to you. Does it mean a lot more density around LRT spaces? Does it mean shifts in zoning to allow for multiple levels? Does it allow an acceleration of the permitting process so that developers can move quicker but also responsibly? What are the solutions that are right for Kanata to accelerate, to create a lot more housing? That's what you're going to be able to apply for in the Housing Accelerator Fund. But in terms of infrastructure like rapid transit and others, we're a government that is absolutely committed to rapid transit, to infrastructure investments. We just put in place permanent rapid transit funding for cities, understanding that cities plan for rapid transit maybe 10 years out, and yet are on like a 1 or 2 year cycle of knowing that the money's going to coming. So that kind of predictability is going to allow for it. But it's not up to the federal government, even someone as knowledgeable as Jenna, as what you need here in Kanata, to draw lines on a map. That's why we work with you. That's why we work with municipalities. We work with the provinces to be able to deliver the things that the community needs, because that's how you get big things done. But thank you for the question. All right, one more question. Yes, you had one. And then I'll come over here. You guys prepare your question already over here.
Thanks, David Ross, CEO of Ross Video. First thing I just want to say is I want to thank you for your leadership during the pandemic. I think you saved a lot of lives. Now, second question is, it's about Ukraine. How do you choose as a government how much is the right amount to help with?
Great questions. First of all, you know, as I've reflected on the pandemic, I had an advantage in Canada that none of my fellow world leaders had. I got to help Canadians through the pandemic, and Canadians stepped up in a huge, reasonable way. Turns out peace, order, and good government are good mottos for in tough times. People understood. Trust our science, trust the doctors, trust that the government is going to be able to be there to support you when you stay home and can't go to work, but you can still pay the rent and pay groceries. The level of social cohesion that we had, the level of, well, you know, close to 90% of Canadians getting double vaccinated, that allowed to have a better pandemic or a less worse pandemic than just about any of our peer countries. And it's a huge credit to Canadians themselves. And that was how we got through this. And remembering our capacity to do that is really, really important. On Ukraine, the answer is simple in a certain sense. We will be there with as much as necessary for as long as necessary until Ukraine wins. It's that simple. But there needs to be a little more context around that answer, because quite frankly, there's a lot of really challenged places around the world, whether it's the horrific takeover of Afghanistan by the Taliban, whether it's crises in South America or challenges in Africa or in the Middle East. You know, Canada continues to step up and will be there to help in a whole bunch of different ways. When we first got elected, it was around a commitment to bring in 25,000 Syrian refugees at a time where the world was turning away, and Canadians did that. We actually altogether brought in about 40,000 Syrian refugees in that first year because we were there to respond. So Canada is a country that believes in standing up for our friends, for countries that need help around the world, and we always will. And Ukraine certainly is a friend to Canada. In about 100 years ago, 150 years ago, Ukrainian immigration settled the prairies to a large extent, and we now have hundreds of thousands, of Canadians who trace their origins back to Ukraine and still are proud that they can keep their Ukrainian heritage and language and be proud Canadians at the same time, because in Canada we figured out that identity is additive. You can add as many layers to be proud of, and being proud of your origins or your home language doesn't take away anything from your pride in being Canadian. Indeed, it adds to it. So this is something that Ukrainian Canadians are very, very proud and connected to their country. And it's also a sense of principle. Ukraine is a friendly country that we have trade deals with, that got invaded by a neighbor. You'd want to be there for that. But more than just the fact of what's happening to Ukraine is what it means. If authoritarian governments around the world actually came to believe that Russia was right in doing what it's trying to do, or was strategic or tactical or successful in saying, well, I have a bigger army than my neighbor, so I'm going to redraw a line on a map. Just that thought is a deep, deep challenge to the decades, close to 7 or 8 decades of stability and prosperity, unprecedented in world history, that we've just been through. The United Nations and its charter, the principles of international law, the principles that you can't redraw lines on a map by force. You can't decide that because those people speak the same language as you, they'll be much happier in your country than they would be in their own country. The deciding that because they're neighbors with a tied history that goes back 400 years, you can just reabsorb them, as Russia's justification is, or prevent them from having the freedom to choose the path they want for themselves as a democracy. The issues that Ukraine is fighting for right now are issues that underpin the stability and the security of all other democracies in the world. And Putin made a few fundamental miscalculations. The first one, underestimating Ukrainians. Talk to any Canadian, we could have told him, don't underestimate Ukrainians. They're extraordinary, because we all have friends and community members who are Ukrainian. And Ukrainians who are defending their language, their territory, their country, yeah, you don't want to go up against that. We can take a little bit of credit for it, because since 2015, since the invasion of Crimea, Canada has been in Ukraine training up their military. We managed to train up about 35,000 members of the Ukrainian armed forces, which is one of the reasons why, along with the Brits and some Americans, why they've been so effective at standing against the Russian military. But more than that, Putin miscalculated, thinking that the West would not respond with the cohesion and the firmness that we have. And you could probably look back over the past decade and say, okay, maybe we should have been a little bit stronger with Putin here, a little stronger with Putin there, because it perhaps lulled him into a sense that, oh, they're all democracies, they have to go to their people for permission if they want to launch a war, they're not going to be able to do this, they're not actually strong. Well, what he's actually discovering now is, yes, perhaps we're cautious about engaging in prolonged conflicts. But when we do decide, no, this is the line, we're not crossing it, we won't back down. And the level of cohesion right now that we've seen from countries around the world who know that Russia's the bad guy in this, and that what they did has direct implications around sovereignty and independence for countries all around the world who know they have historical animus with a neighbor that maybe has a powerful army. I mean, that's the kind of world we do not want to be bringing up our kids and grandkids in. And that's why we will stand with Ukraine as long as it takes to make sure that everyone knows that Russia made a foolish and fundamental mistake. Thanks. We have time just for a few more questions, so I'll take one from here, one from here, one from here. No, yes, one from here. So, one from there. Yes, you, sir.
Prime Minister, my name is Sasha Guerra. I'm the president of cybersecurity at Calian Group. It's hard to believe, but it's been 14 years since a great Canadian institution, Nortel, declared bankruptcy. Like many others in this room, I had the opportunity to grow up in the hallways of what was the Google campus of its time. It was a loss not only for the community, but for Canada and our technology brand. Since then, it feels like we've done a great job in incubating a lot more startups. We've had some success stories with multinational investments, as well as success stories like Kinaxis and Calian Group and Ross Video and the Shopifys of the world, but it feels like we've failed to do that in volume. What are we doing to help support Canadian companies, tech companies, scale up? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a question that successive governments in Canada have struggled with for many, many, many years. It's Nortel. You can put BlackBerry a little bit in that category as well, where we almost had a global platform and then it just didn't. And the number of Canadian companies that are proud to be Canadian and want to scale up in Canada, but then just get an offer from somewhere else to buy them up and you know, grow them, that we're having trouble competing with. And that's something that, quite frankly, I'm hoping that our Canadian Innovation Corporation is going to help with. But there's been a lot of different attempts over the years to try and figure out that scale-up program. We have so many brilliant innovators in this country. Getting to the $10, $20 million capitalization mark is not particularly difficult. Getting from that 20 million to the 100 million to the 500 million is a really big step for Canada. I think yeah, there's the culture and the attractiveness of Silicon Valley in terms of the access to capital, the easy access to capital. I think we might see some of the bounce back from that right now with the challenges around SVB. But we want to get that balance right. We do want to create a place where entrepreneurs can, you know, be extraordinarily successful as they take big risks and they pay off. We want that to happen. We don't want to be, you know, seen as a branch economy to the United States, where we do a little innovation and they manage to commercialize it. There's no easy answers on it, but know that it's something we're absolutely focused on, and something that, quite frankly, I want to hear from all of you on as well, on what we can do to unlock the key to staying in Canada. I think one of the things that we do offer is a level of stability that might be a little more attractive now than it was even a couple of months ago. And we'll use those advantages we can. We'll just keep trucking along steadily as hardworking, earnest Canadians, drawing the best from around the world, and build success for ourselves and contribute to the world. And hopefully we will be able to land a few big platforms that will be homegrown. It's coming, but we just got to keep working at it. Thanks for your question, Sasha. All right. Yes.
Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister. My name is Shima Khan. I'm a patent agent here at Kinaxis. My question is not about patents.
Thank you. I'd probably have more questions for you about patents than you'd have for me. But
Great. First, I want to thank you for appointing a special representative to combat Islamophobia. My good friend Amir, thank you for that. My question has to do with, I think, an issue that affects every single person, every single Canadian, and that's the notwithstanding clause. As you know, this is a clause that can be invoked by provincial government, or federal government, that suspends basic human rights of every Canadian: freedom of conscience, freedom of religion, freedom from presumption of innocence upon being arrested, the right to have counsel upon being arrested, the right to know why one is arrested, so on and so forth. These are fundamental rights that I think we take for granted, and I don't think we realize that they are in jeopardy. And as you know, it's been invoked by Quebec twice, by Ontario. It's becoming more frequent.
it's been invoked more than that by Quebec, but anyway. Yeah.
But what, as a Canadian, I'm worried for my kids' future and beyond. This can be exploited and abused, and it's something I think we have to guard against. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Shima. We're wrapping up, and I know probably none of you feel like getting a bit of a political science course right now, but you're going to get it anyway. One of the challenges in democracies is known as the tyranny of the majority. When you say, well, it's a democracy, we'll vote on it and we'll do the right thing as we move forward. That's the principle we run with. Democracy, the majority is always right, except of course when it isn't. If you were to imagine a scenario in which someone proposed to pass a law that said people who are right-handed will pay fewer taxes, and they'll be compensated by people who are left-handed, because, you know, left-handed people keep cutting themselves with the wrong-headed scissors, and they open doors the wrong way, and there's more addition to, sorry, one lefty appreciates that. You know, it's a ridiculous thought, right? But imagine for a second, people decided, okay, I'm going to vote with my self-interest, and you had a bill pass, 80%, that was unfair to people who can't help the fact that they're born left-handed, no matter how many nuns rapped on their knuckles when they were in school, to try and force them to be right-handed. They're just left-handed. You can't change anything about that. That wouldn't be fair, even though you can imagine right-handers voting massively, and therefore, hey, it voted on it, it's a democracy, that's decided. Well, no, it doesn't work that way. And that's why most, if not all, democracies have some sort of recognition of fundamental, inalienable rights that can't be taken away by governments making laws that please the majority. And one of the challenges with that, I mean, there's a few challenges with that, but one of the ones is the recognition of fundamental rights tends to be worked out in the courts. And you will find a certain amount of sort of more right-leaning political thinkers who say, well, no, it should be Parliament, or should be Congress, or should be the legislature that makes laws that shouldn't be overridden by the courts. And that's why it's extremely difficult to adjust or to change a constitution. But you can change a constitution. You can, you know, if we brought in a Charter of Rights and Freedoms, Canada could decide to bring out a Charter of Rights and Freedoms by the same sorts of mechanisms. It requires a level of consensus across the provinces. 7 provinces representing 50% of the population. For some things, it actually needs unanimity of the provinces to be able to change the constitution, but it can be done. But one of the concessions made in order to have our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is what my father did in 1982, was to say that, okay, you provinces, you absolutely don't want us to just bring in a Charter of Rights and Freedoms with it. What if we created a notwithstanding clause that allowed you, for a time-limited moment, to withdraw from some of those rights so you could pass some of those protections, so you could pass a law that, you know, wasn't exactly aligned with rights but was necessary for your circumstances. And that was the compromise that allowed Canada to get our Constitution repatriated from where it was over in England, and we were able to actually bring in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which is a charter that is widely respected and a constitution that has been emulated by countries around the world as they are trying to develop their own approach to things. The idea around the notwithstanding clause, though, was that if any government was deciding to pass a piece of legislation that the courts had found violated their fundamental rights, there would be a heavy political price to that. Suppose, for example, a government brought in that right-handed law. A lefty would quite rightly go to the courts and say, this is unfair, it's violating my fundamental rights. The courts would say, absolutely, that law is violating your fundamental rights. Government, you have to change that law. And then the provincial government or federal government or whatever order of government did it would have to say, actually, no, we're going to opt out of that court decision. We're going to keep that law in place for 5 years while we figure out some other way of solving this problem we had. That was a compromise. But you can imagine that if a government were to say, I'm suspending your fundamental rights and freedoms so I can pass this popular law, Canadians would and should be reasonably outraged. Because, you know, freedom, fundamental freedom, sort of an important concept that we really appreciate here in Canada. The challenge we have now is not that people are starting to use a notwithstanding clause, although it is a bit of a challenge. It's that they're starting to use it preemptively, proactively. So it's not that the court has struck down a law and said, that's unconstitutional, and then they say, okay, well, I'm going to bring in the notwithstanding clause. I got to bring in the joker on top of it. No. It's that they're using it before it can even be challenged in the courts, which means that there is far less of a political consequence or penalty to suspending people's fundamental rights. Where, you know, it's not that the law was unjust, it's that, well, some people might not like it, so I'm going to make it so you can't contest it at all. But no court has actually said, this law overrides or suspends or you know, goes against your fundamental rights and freedoms. And absent a court saying that, it just becomes another political debate. And that's the dangerous element of preemptively using the notwithstanding clause, which is something that it was sort of never envisaged that it would be used. So we're now in a situation where I think Canadians should be genuinely concerned. I mean, part of the consequence of the rise in populism, part of the consequence of the kind of polarization we have in society that's sort of creeping in around the edges, means that we do have to be very, very thoughtful and aware of limits or attacks on fundamental rights and freedoms, because fundamental rights and freedoms are always there, almost by definition, to protect people who are marginalized, who are in the minority, who are often victims or sideswiped by a majority that either is trying to oppress them, but that's rarer than just not noticing them and not thinking about the consequences of this particular policy or this particular approach on communities that don't necessarily have the historical weight or power to make sure that their voices are loudly heard. And in more populist frames, standing up for majorities very loudly tends to be more rewarding politically than standing up for a whole bunch of different minorities. And that's why the way I was raised is always standing up for minorities, because that's the best way to make sure you're standing up for everyone. But that challenge right now is why it's more important than ever that we not take for granted our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that we remain focused on how we're going to make sure that in our society, in our country, in our communities, we are making sure we're listening to and protecting everyone's rights. That's what the Charter does, and that's what the notwithstanding clause, particularly its preemptive use, puts at risk. So thank you very much for sharing that. And one last question from this section where we didn't have a question. There you go, over to you. You get the last question of the night.
Yes. Hi, my name is Meng Udompet. I'm a Kinaxis employee.
Sorry, what was your first name?
Meng Udompet.
Meng, perfect.
Yes. So I do have a question about technology and society. So this question is about, we know that internet changed pretty much the way we communicate all over the world. And social media amplify that. And obviously there's positive and there's negative. The negative side is that we can't seem to disconnect, right? And that's dangerous for a variety of reasons. Now we know that technology is a metaverse is on, is about to be rolled out. Facebook changed its image to metaverse. Do we as Canada have any ways to assess the impact and try to protect society from potentially misuse, especially our young one? Do we have anything in the educational system to educate them to find balance so that we doesn't lose the basic essence of humanity? Simple interaction, for example, right? Going out, looking at nature with family, those can be lost with technology like this. Thank you.
Listen, I got two teenagers, and getting them off their phones is sometimes a really, really big challenge. I often think about it as related to sort of the challenges we have with sugar and junk food, for example. For the past 200,000 years, humanity, Homo sapiens, has been pretty much of exactly the same genetic makeup. So what we learned for, whatever it is, 97% of our time as a species, even tracing before that, gives us certain habits of mind that are essential for our survival as beings. We're essential for survival for a long time. Eating things that are sweet, eating things that are fatty, harder to find in the wild, and therefore you really want to load up on them when you can. Suddenly we're in an era of abundance of sugar, abundance of fats. As we're starting to readjust to that, we've had to fight against our instincts to gobble up everything we can, because fast food and junk food is just so easy that our caveman brains are not programmed to be sort of have a little bit of restraint around that, because for all of evolution, these were good things. You grabbed those berries while they were ripe. You'd get that fat when you could, because it would help you through the winter. Similarly, social media has managed to tap into sort of almost instinctive needs as social animals to know what our tribe is thinking of us, and know where we are in the hierarchy of things, and know what things to respond to. I still remember the very first time, and the only time in my defense, I got caught by a phishing scam on Twitter. One of my fellow MPs sent me this is back in like 2009, 2010, sent me a link saying, "Oh my God, you're not going to believe what they're saying about you." And then the link underneath, I'm like, "Oh, what are they saying about me?" "Oh, put in your password again." "Oh, okay, that's strange." I put in my password again. Of course, we'll roll our eyes now. It was 2009, okay? But social media, and it's gotten way more sophisticated now. How to hook us in? Okay, just one more fail army video. You know, what is that glitter bomb doing now? One more cat video. We learn to get hooked into things that are just easy, and suddenly it's 3 a.m. You're still on your computer going, how did I do this? It's because increasingly sophisticated algorithms are learning exactly what your triggers are going to be to click one more time or to push one more time. And we're adults, right? Most of us remember, or got to go through a time where there were a few less sophisticated algorithms, so maybe we've built up a little resistance to it. But teenagers, my God. I mean, teenagers, I remember when I was a teenager, teenagers are a special breed of reactive, hormones and jumping on this and jumping on that. And the power that social media and a like button and approvals and networks have on them when you're a teenager, it's all about how you can get validation from your peer group and your friends. There are huge challenges around that. And quite frankly, as a government, or as governments 50 years ago, we were able to mostly protect people because we lived our lives all in the real world. Governments have very limited tools to protect people in an online world, which is a good thing. It allows for a tremendous amount of freedom of expression, freedom of discovery, no oppressive governments controlling what you see, what you want. But it also opens us up to a tremendous amount of crap, of hate speech, of things that are illegal, but also things that are just gonna bring us down roads where we're going to get lost. I remember a few years ago, before the pandemic, getting really fascinated by flat earthers and trying to understand sort of the thinking behind them, of people who've decided actively to create an identity for themselves that was to just clearly reject what science settled thousands of years ago with the ancient Greeks. and that there's no real contrast to it. It's more of an identity thing rather than a reasoning thing. And to have people sucked into that, it was fascinating to try and see what it was all about. And then, of course, we went on to understand the phenomenon of anti-vaxxers and anti-science and anti-skeptics, and this rise in these echo chambers that are validating this kind of thinking in ways that have real consequences. There are people in Canada who died surrounded by their families because they truly and genuinely believed that the vaccine was more dangerous than the virus. And it killed them. And, my responsibility as Prime Minister is to try and keep everyone in this country as safe as I possibly can, but I can't protect everyone from every bit of disinformation on the internet. So we have to have reflections of how we move forward, how we responsibilize the companies that are controlling so much, the private companies that are controlling so much of the public square you now live in, that doesn't have police paid by your taxes to keep you safe. It doesn't have, rules around businesses to regulate you so you don't get scammed by the corner store. Like, this is the new world we're in that we're going to have to try and adjust to. And I can tell you, I'm worried about the direction we're going. You may have seen this in the news recently, but both Google and Facebook have announced that they would rather not allow Canadians to access news through Google or through Facebook. They would rather block Canadians from access to news than pay journalists for the work they do writing the news. That's messed up. And yet, the power they have means that they are very seriously convinced that people will rather be pissed off at me for forcing Google and Facebook to tweak their business model that involves them making all the money off of ad revenue from the newspaper article that you share with a friend. People will be pissed off at me because you can't access news anymore, rather than be upset at Facebook and Google that are making billions of dollars, while journalists are struggling to pay their rent and their mortgage because the systems are changing. And that's where, as a country and as a society, we have to decide what are our principles, what are our values. And I know that for democracy to work, we need a strong, independent, thoughtful journalism that is able to disseminate information, to challenge, to have come at it with different perspectives. It's essential to have a democracy that works. And right now, those tech giants are flexing their muscles because they're worried that if in Canada we start making them pay for the journalism they're sharing for free, it's not making Canadians pay. You already pay with your eyeballs on ads. It's about making some of that ad revenue go to the people who are actually writing quality journalism, including local journalism that you want to see. That's something that really matters. And that's part of the fight we're in right now. We're also in a fight over Canadian content. People of a certain age will remember when we would watch primetime TV or listen to the radio, 1/3 of all songs played on the radio had to be Canadian content. That's why Bryan Adams and Celine Dion and everybody but the Tragically Hip were able to pierce world class and become extraordinary competitive in a world where we're so aware of being drowned out by the United States' massive cultural machine. We were able to cling to our own and build a world-class movie industry and world-class directors and actors and comedians and musicians because we said, okay, we're going to make sure we're leaning in and giving extra support so Canadians see more Canadian content. We're right now trying to figure out or we've got a proposal on how to make sure that YouTube algorithms and TikTok algorithms or whatever it is gives a little boost to Canadian content for here in Canada. It's a challenge because that's not the way the internet naturally works. But we're saying, you know what, if we want Canadian culture and Canadian creators to be able to compete, let's make sure that they can succeed in Canada. And that's, of course, something that people are really worried about us pushing back on. But these are the kinds of conversations we're having to have. And there are a lot more to have on how to protect our kids and how to keep them safe. But a thoughtful, informed society in conversations like these had around dinner tables, around lunch tables, around coffee tables around the country should be able to move us forward, because these are big, complicated issues we're grappling with. Anyone who puts forward a simple answer to a complex issue is trying to sell you something. And they're also wrong. Complex problems have complex solutions, and there's always trade-offs. And it's how we go into those trade-offs, figuring, okay, I'm going to figure out the best possible way of doing this, and we'll adjust it as society changes, and we'll adjust it as people give us feedback. And we'll muddle our way forward, but we'll stay true to our values, and we'll stay true to who we are. That's what politics is supposed to be about. Politics is no more than how we choose to organize ourselves as a society and build for a better future. And tonight, each and every one of you was very helpful to me in reflecting on how we're moving forward and letting me hear some of your priorities. And I hope I could help shape some of the ways you're thinking about the challenges you're facing in your lives, in your industry, in your homes, and mostly in the world we all share and will for many years to come. Merci beaucoup tout le monde. Thank you all very, very much.